What I have here is a recently acquired OS FS70 Surpass engine. I got it in a trade with some other engines on RC groups. What I like to do with these engines is kind of take a quick look on the inside and kind of figure out, I mean, when you get used engines, you really don't know the history of them, or most times you really don't know the history. And this is a fairly old design. OS released this design in 1988. The FS72 came out in 2000, so I don't know if that means the production run ended for these in 2000 or not, but these things kind of tell a little bit of a story. If you look at the external and the internal parts of them, you kind of try to piece together what the history of the engine is. This one overall is in pretty darn good shape, even if it is a vintage 1988 engine, which I have no idea if it is or not. I did run this engine yesterday, and it ran quite well. It's got very good compression. Externally, yeah, it's got pretty strong compression there. You know, it looks like it's had some use, obviously. Overall, it's in pretty good shape, but I do see a few things here that are a little odd. I see these screws here attaching the carburetor or Phillips head when they should be just metric hex keys. And the valve cover has some Phillips head screws too. So, I mean, overall, right now, what this engine's telling me is that it's had a good life. Looks like the previous owner or owners have taken fairly decent care of it. It's got a little bit of exhaust residue here, which is kind of to be expected for an engine that's been run quite well, but for the amount of compression this thing's got, it's really in pretty good shape. The only other thing to note really is this prop washer, or the drive thrust washer here, has got quite a bit of marring on it. It looks like somebody's grabbed it with the pliers a few times for whatever reason. The mounting lugs look pretty good. I mean, obviously this engine was used, and I was told it was on an airplane when the previous owner got it. So he took it off, and we made a trade. So I'm going to take a look at the inside of this engine and see if it'll tell me any more about its history. Start by removing the valve cover here. See if those screws feel like they want to cooperate at all. They don't look stripped, but they look like they've been loosened a few times before, so hopefully I don't strip them out. I'm probably going to go see if I can find some replacements at the hardware store, though, because I really don't want to reuse these screws. I don't like the way they look. Hardware store, hobby store. My local hobby store still carries quite a few of the metric screws, so should be in good shape there. Okay, this is interesting. So the valve train looks pretty decent, pretty clean. I mean, it's got wear on it, but this gasket is odd. I don't think I've ever recalled seeing a black gasket like that, but it does look like it was made for the engine. Like I said, I ran this engine yesterday, so I know it's in pretty decent shape. So let's go on to the carburetor here. Probably going to have to flip to my other Phillips head to try and get these out. Hopefully they come out without any issue. That one's loose, and that one's loose. These two look like they could have very easily stripped, so those are a bit of a concern. But it looks like they're coming out okay now. Again, I'm going to replace these screws because I just don't like having fasteners that are mismatched like that. Let's see, get the right size here. See what this guy's like. Now there should be a gasket under here. We'll see if it's present. What kind of condition it looks like it's in. These feel like they were torqued pretty well. Like, okay, guess I just fell apart there. So I don't see a gasket. I'm pretty sure that this should have had a gasket on it, so this has probably been apart before, and this should just pull right off. It's got an O-ring in there. The carb, I may go ahead and take the throttle, or take this arm out, or the throttle barrel out, inspect it, but for now that doesn't look too bad. Kind of surprised though, that should have probably had a gasket on it. Let's take a look inside here. This will be where we see some really interesting stuff. Not sure how far down I'm going to tear this engine down. It just kind of depends on what I find, because it is a running engine. So if I don't need to take it down too far, I won't. I'm definitely going to take the head off so I can see what the top of the piston looks like. And this is going to tell me what the end of the crankshaft and that rear bearing look like. Again, no gasket. Obviously it's a worn engine or it's a used engine, but it doesn't look too bad in there. Normal wear and tear to me it looks like. So I'd say whoever owned this engine took pretty decent care of it. I mean, I've seen these things where it's just built up with rust or a lot of excessive caster deposits in there if it had sat for a long time, but this engine actually looks like it's in pretty good shape. Next I'm going to take the rocker arms off. I see 4 head screws here, but I have a funny feeling that there might be a 5th head screw underneath there. I'm not entirely sure. It's been a while since I've been inside of an OS engine, or at least one this size. Just pull right out. I'm going to keep that like that. And yes, it does look like there's another screw head right there. So let's see what we can do here. These heads, or these screw heads, don't look like they're marred up at all, so we shouldn't have any issues here as long as I get them fully recessed in there. Feels like it's been opened up before, because I'm not hearing that snap that I normally would hear if it was you know, an unopened up engine before. I can feel the torque isn't even on these screws. Push rods out. Get that one up a little bit so I can pull it out. Okay, the head's coming off here. There you have it. The O-ring fell off of here. Let me pull this cover off. Okay, so here's the inside. The top looks quite nice actually. So now I'm curious as to how much runtime this engine really has. Typically, if this was a high runtime engine, I would think that I would see that this top of the piston would be a lot more dark, discolored. This doesn't look too bad at all, which might explain why it ran so well. And then here, again, let me drop these screws out. Look at this. The intake valve still looks pretty new. The exhaust valve obviously has some carbon buildup on it, and it looks like we had a little bit of exhaust leak here. Recall I said that it didn't feel like these screws were evenly torqued. So this could be where all that exhaust residue came from, is that these head screws weren't evenly torqued, but it did provide decent compression, or actually extremely good compression, and it ran quite well. But now I'm kind of happy to see that maybe this is a lower time engine than I originally thought. So maybe this isn't as old as it potentially could be from 1988, but these two things alone tell me quite a bit. It tells me that it's not overly run, and that these screws may not have been torqued properly, and that's where we got this exhaust leak, or at least a little bit of blow by here, so we got this residue buildup on the exhaust side. But the top of the piston looks pretty decent. I'm not really sure I'm going to take this down much further than that, because I'm not sure there's really any need. I might take this timing gear cover off just for giggles and look inside there, but other than that, I'll clean this stuff up a little bit and put it back together and find an engine or an airplane for it. So let me take this timing cover off real quick and just take a quick peek inside there and see what it looks like. I'm not going to schedule this for a bearing change at this time because, quite honestly, the bearings feel fine. They don't look too bad. The inside looks pretty nice. I think I'm just going to try and find an airplane for this thing and run the heck out of it. One thing that's interesting here is that I have an OSFS 20 that I just opened up recently, and instead of a ball bearing like this, it had a bushed area with just a single steel ball to be a bearing surface. This, obviously, you can see has a real ball bearing in there, and it's really not in bad shape. I don't know if I've got something here that I can quickly kind of stuff in there and test how it rotates. Yeah, it feels fine. So I don't know that there's any need for me to do anything more than that. It's kind of interesting to look inside there. There's not an excessive amount of oil in there. I mean, typically that's kind of one of those places where you don't really get a lot of oil. I mean, there's really nothing there at all. So one thing I will do, I'm not going to pull that timing gear out because it's timed properly, but I will throw some oil in there anyway and put the cover back on, and like I said, put this thing back together and run the crap out of it. I spent a couple of minutes cleaning. I kind of cleaned the top of the piston up. Again, didn't do anything in here, but I did clean the head up a little bit. I didn't get everything off there, but I got enough off there. So I was going to go ahead, and a lot of times when I'm reassembling or these engines, I'll just use 3-in-1 oil. So I'm just going to kind of generously throw some 3-in-1 oil in this area here. Get that all nice and lubed up, and put some on this bearing here. This area doesn't usually get a whole lot of lubrication anyway, so it's good to pop that cover off every now and then. Put some in there. Now again, I would have thought that this would have even had a little gasket on it, but maybe not. I mean, maybe because of the fact that it doesn't see a lot of oil. They don't figure it really needs a gasket there to leak, but the fact that there wasn't one on the back plate is kind of interesting. I mean, I know OS makes great engines. Maybe they figure they just machine these parts so well that they don't need gaskets on them, but I guess one never knows. I'm going to put, even though I ran this engine, it does look pretty decent in there. I'll probably just put a little bit here on the bearing. I mean, there is still some oil in there from the other day when I ran it, but a little bit of oil in there can't hurt anything for sure. A little drop on that connecting rod joint there. Go ahead and put my back plate back on that has no gasket.